Hi folks, thanks for watching my monologue. As you may have heard, there's been a recent run on guns and ammunition. I just wanted to let you know that Guns Etc. is in a 10,200 square foot building which holds a lot of guns. So Guns Etc. is open and has a lot of product. Or you can go to gunsetc.com, that's gunsetc.com, and if you like my monologue, please subscribe to our channel using 960 The Patriot.
Show.
Well, welcome back and happy May 5th. A good speech is a rare thing. A very good speech is a very rare thing. But rhetoric and oratory are important, exceedingly so, right? Communication with reason is what Aristotle taught was what distinguished the human from the other animals. And oratory and rhetoric used to be taught as classes, not only in high school but in college. It's long gone in high school, and now communications has replaced it in college, much like social studies has replaced American history or civics. When we knew what we were teaching and called it what it was, we taught and learned it much, much better. Move history to social studies and you learn about social movements and sociology, not history. Move rhetoric and oratory to communication and you don't study rhetoric and oratory. You study, well, as the Stanford course catalog puts it, quote, the nature and social role of the various media, their structure, function, and ethics, and their impact on the political system, culture, and society, close quote. In other words, you study social studies, which is, in both cases, you study how a newspaper can change the founding date of the country in which it was born and headquartered. And you learn nothing, or at least nothing rightly. As Karl Marx wrote, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. I give you our modern colleges. I give you the New York Times. I give you the Nobel Prize Committee. More on this in a bit, but I hope you take my point. A social movement took over a newspaper, which took over American history. Because social studies and communications, not history and rhetoric, or reason. But serious messages are what some of us still take seriously and try to recommunicate. That was the idea behind the college commencement address once upon a time. We believe they date back to John Winthrop. They were never delivered by feel-good artists. They were delivered by, well, think-good scholars. Never actors and actresses, but people of letters, of great wisdom, accomplishment, world leaders and discoverers, and religious clergy. Yes, religious clergy. So in our week of commencement speeches, I'm trying to give you some of that, of what they used to be like or should be like. And again, I'll give mine on Friday. I stumbled upon this one to the Stanford graduates of 1971, not so long ago. It was given by Eric Sevareid. Not sure how many of you remember him. He was a CBS newsman, but known too, perhaps too easily, but nonetheless known as a bit of a public intellectual. Maybe around the status of someone like Ted Koppel today. Maybe a little more than that. In any event, he said to the Stanford class of 1971, and I thought it good and worth communicating. You see, that too is the value of a great speech, one that isn't given and forgotten as it withers away in ether, but one that lasts, has gravity and lasts. We know speeches like that. There's, of course, Pericles' funeral oration, or the Sermon on the Mount, Patrick Henry, Gettysburg Address. So many that were once standard learning and memorization. I do pause to wonder what the Nobel Committee and the New York Times thinks Lincoln meant when he spoke of 77 years. I'm guessing they didn't care or simply didn't know of that speech. Some things Sevareid said, and this was what constitutes the liberal media in the 1970s, keep that in mind, to the Stanford graduates was this, quote, journalists tend to develop an instructive resistance to popular cliches. As I do not believe that law and order is a code word for racism, save among bigots, so I do not share the idea that the American middle class is apathetic. It's not apathy that is stretching our political and social institutions to the breaking point. It is the very opposite, the conflict of intense, highly unapathetic individuals, groups, and vested interests. Kind of interesting, no? There was a great intellectual war on the middle class in those days and their apathy to causes back then. He wasn't having it. He went on, quote, I have become persuaded that the American middle class is probably the most evangelical middle class on earth or close to it. You could hardly throw a stone in the typical established suburb without hitting a house where the parents are not only rearing and educating their children to the limit of their ability, not only enduring heavy taxes, a high proportion of which now goes to the less fortunate, but working after hours to help others through some neighborhood enterprise, charitable or otherwise. I find this in very few other countries, close quote. Imagine that. A defense of American greatness in the widely lambasted middle-class, average American household from, again, what constituted a liberal intellectual, talking about middle America. He was a liberal member of the mainstream media, and not only did he defend America's middle class, he spoke of law and order as a good thing. He went on to conclude this way, providing the lesson from a Greek scholar from Columbia University, quote, "As far as knowledge and conscious reason will go, we should follow resolutely the austere guidance. When they reach their limits," he said, "as they do, then we must use as best we can those fainter powers of apprehension and surmise and sensitiveness, by which, after all, most high truth has been reached, as well as most high art and poetry. Careful always to seek for truth and not for our own emotional satisfaction. Careful not to neglect the real needs of men and women through basing our life on dreams, and remembering above all to walk gently in a world where the lights are dim and the very stars wander." Close quote. Beautiful, no? He finished this way, quote, "Journalists who have lived as I have lived are generally poor at moral exhortation. We may be meddlesome, proctoring thorns in the flesh of men with public power. We are a bit reluctant about direct advice to private persons. But since you have honored me with this pulpit and your attention, I will venture 4 prospective observations. It is necessary that we all do good directly whenever we can. It is more important in the end for society as well as ourselves that we do well in our own work, whether that be laying a sewer or teaching philosophy. What counts the most in the long haul of adult life is not brilliance or eloquence or charisma or daring do, but the quality the Romans called gravitas, patience, stamina, weight of judgment. Churchill was right. The prime virtue is courage because it makes all the other virtues possible. And what Americans must find again is their sense of trust. We have to trust others, even those we fear and think may wish us harm. We have, each of us, to take this risk. That is what built this country, risk and trust, a country of which I, for one, am grateful beyond my expression to be a part." Close quote. Now, this again was 1971. War was raging. America was being run down on the college campuses and in a lot of the commentary and in the media. The awful year of 1968 was still in many minds. Cities were burning, Black Panthers and Weathermen were rioting, and yet this is what a liberal mainstream journalist was telling college students. How far we've come. Fast forward to 1998, nearly 30 years later, Stanford, again. I mentioned Ted Koppel earlier. He's the closest I could think of as a mainstream liberal journalist who was known, too, as a public intellectual. He addressed the Stanford class of 1998 on the Lewinsky scandal, of all things, and this is how he concluded. "We have problems because we permit the carnival of process to divert us from the central questions, what is right and what is wrong. We have reverted to some of the darker practices of our ancestors, seeking to establish truth by ordeal." Think about that for a moment, a carnival of process. I've spoken a lot lately about the crisis industrial complex. Koppel gives it the name a carnival of process. Carnival is, I think, the operative word here. But he concludes, quote, "The responsibility to effect change remains, as it always has been, an individual responsibility. Individual responsibility, of course, can only come if we have individual freedom. Responsibility is not possible without freedom. Freedom of choice, after all. Doesn't mean anything if you do things because of coercion. What is great about our system of law and government is precisely its focus on the rights and obligations of the individual," he says. And then his final conclusion, quote, "Aspire to decency, practice civility toward one another, admire and emulate ethical behavior wherever you find it, apply a rigid standard of morality to your lives, and if periodically you fail, as surely you will, adjust your lives and not the standards." Notice what he did there. He redounded us to the classic and traditional virtues of self-discipline, strong standards of morality, and, of course, forgiveness, because we are all human. Why did I focus on these 2 commencement speeches for today? Well, we had a caller yesterday who asked if the media would ever control itself again, could ever be restored and trusted. No, the answer is no, not unless and until they see the kinds of legatees to the likes of Severide and Koppel that they are. But, of course, that is a wish that will not be granted. Still, once there were liberals here, and now you know what we mean when we talk about what a liberal used to be. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.